Approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Okay, second.
Second.
Okay, please. Adjustments to the agenda or announcements? Any adjustments or announcements? Okay, seeing none. Comments from the audience. I don't have any cards. So no one signed up. Okay, so let's just public hearing for our CMAC 16 to 18 funding.
That should be short.
This is a discussion of the applications that have been submitted for use of CMAC and the remaining STVG funds for FY16 to 18. Just to provide a quick update on the process, we first started talking about CMAC projects back in October or November. We brainstormed a list of 72 projects. We had a deadline for application submittals of June 15th. At that date, we received 17 applications. A pretty well-considered, well-vetted list of projects already at this point. TPC has had those applications available to them to review. They've also now been available to the public and to NPC. What we're the CMAC funds available are about $7.1 million. There's also about $600,000 remaining of surface transportation block grant funds for FY16 to 18, and we're planning to just make recommendations for CMAC as well as of those applications that we received. As I said, there were 17 for CMAC projects, and there were 2 that were specifically for STVG. Due to the eligibility overlap of STVG and CMAC funds, technically the CMAC projects are eligible for STVG, and the staff that submitted the CMAC applications expressed that their projects should be recommended for CMAC funding should they not be recommended, for STVG funding should they not be recommended for CMAC funding. Any questions about that? I hope I said that clearly.
Questions?
Okay. If you have the cover memo that went out with the meeting materials on the 19 total applications that were received, the top list is for the CMAC and the bottom 2 are for the STVG. The total funding request for CMAC is about $1.5 million beyond what we have available. So the selection process becomes important at that point. So it falls on TPC to develop a funding recommendation for the use of those funds. They will be deciding on that by the federal guidance. Certain elements of that application, such as the quantifiable emissions benefits, and I should say that all of these 17 applications are completely eligible as far as the federal criteria are concerned. They all have demonstrated quantifiable emissions benefits. In addition to that, TPC is going to consider, as required federally, the cost effectiveness of those projects. Beyond that, TPC is going to determine their recommendation on the applications as a whole, not limiting themselves to just the federally required elements, but also the elements of the applications that are regional priorities, such as safety and other considerations. Ultimately, what TPC will recommend to NPC will be something that is defendable and well-reasoned, as was the suggestion at the previous NPC meeting. I'd also like to point out that we would like to extend the public comment period meeting materials to conclude July 30th. We'd like to just extend that to the next NPC meeting, August 3rd. and also hold a second public hearing at the August 3rd meeting to allow people to speak to NPC after the TPC has released their recommendations. We're also prepared to answer any questions that you have about any of the specific applications themselves. Staff is on hand to address concerns you might have. Ultimately, what we're looking for is some feedback or direction if this committee has any for TPC.
Is there any questions or feedback? I'll give you all. So what if we don't like the recommendations from TPC?
Well, hopefully you have more feedback than saying you just don't like it.
Well, in the general sense that it wouldn't be the highest priority. I mean, because I'm assuming you're coming back with a group that would fit within the amount of funding.
That's right.
And dropping some off where I'm just asking, you know, what's the ability to take a look at the projects. If these are all federally eligible, then I'm assuming you're using the other criteria to actually narrow down the recommendations.
That's right, but we could narrow down the recommendations also based on federally required quantifiable elements as well.
Okay.
Ultimately, if NPC is not happy with the recommendation, TPC would revisit the recommendation.
Okay, all right. Any other?
No, just a
Yeah.
follow-up clarification to that question. So when the final recommendations are offered, is a justification, will we see a justification for why those are?
Absolutely. Staff will also be available to answer questions of the recommendation.
So the only other comment I'm going to have a hard-fought battle. It's not like we did any arm wrestling, literally, but this is our first go-around in terms of receiving CMAQ money. So it would be important what projects we pick, that they are very reflective of the fact that we said that we were not only eligible, but we definitely have projects that fit the criteria and that have been overdue or this funding would very specifically address. So as the policy group takes a look at it, I would definitely want everyone to be cognizant of the fact that you know, we are basically setting ourselves up for how our CMAQ funding will be viewed for our, which isn't settled yet in terms of after 18. So that still has to go before OTC, whether, you know, what we get and how we get it. So making careful, looking at it carefully in projects. And I'll just as an aside, say that I definitely like the projects that directly address students, address dust, address biped, address those kind of issues, maybe over a facility. That I'm more keen on those, at least in this first go around with funding, that we address some of those things that I think are important to keep to get cars off of it. I know there's more than one school project, and those are always I'm a parent sitting in a line, idling my car, picking up my children, not, you know, and I've been guilty of that too, so it's not like, but I'm not pointing a finger, but those kind of projects, I'm probably more keen on than some of the others, so that's just my personal preference. Yes, Ellen.
Thank you, Mayor. So the page 1 of the memo, last bullet, says approved CMAQ projects are reviewed by ODOT and FHW. For projects.
It is a little more complicated than that. The eligibility is would make that determination, but really what their role is in that step is considering the cost effectiveness and the quantifiable emissions benefits, those two federally required elements, and making sure that the projects that this group approves for funding are well reasoned considering those two things. And we're not required to only make our recommendations based on those two things. But Federal Highways does have an opportunity to say, well, this one that you've chosen to fund is really cost effective, and this other one that wasn't a priority to you is not. And there might be some dialogue there, an opportunity for us to need to explain why we've selected that. And they do have the power to say, no, you need to revisit that.
Will they just see the list of ones forwarded, or will they see the entire list? Like the next 2 or 3 that are dropped off?
They,
So they could say, pick number 2 that got dropped off because we think that's a better project than this one, and drop those down.
that's a good question. I believe we're not required to submit anything more than our funding recommendations, or our approved projects by this group.
Yeah, that would be good and advised.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Yes, Patty?
So, unless I missed something somewhere else, you basically have to draw the line in-ground bus lift, because that's how much money there is?
This is not any kind of prioritized list.
Oh, it's not, I
No,
thought it was.
just listed by funding request.
We don't have to send it prioritized somewhere?
Ultimately, we'll just send our funding recommendations, and it does not need to be prioritized unless the group wants it to be.
Okay, well, I'm wondering, like within LTD or within Springfield, or like when you take the organizations, do they have priorities? I mean, did they submit, this is our first priority, second priority?
Yeah, that has been part of the discussion.
Okay, thank you.
So maybe a clarification is, yes, Ellen?
Another question about, so if FHWA is going to evaluate these on emission reductions, is that what you said?
That's right.
I mean, that's the criteria. So how exactly do they do that? I noticed like on page 3 of the first application, this is an example. There's the table that has all the emissions reductions. So do they look at that and how much it costs and like do a simple calculation of dollars per kilogram?
We perform the emissions benefits, that kilograms per day for each of these applications except for LTD. That's something that's on us to take care of. We'll send that to Federal Highway, well, to ODOT and Federal Highways, and they'll just look at our calculations, our methodology. But really what they're looking at is how do these numbers compare. They're saying statewide applications, and they have a pretty good sense of which are good reducing projects and which ones aren't, and then they have some questions based on it. But as I said, as far as the eligibility requirements go, every one of these was able to quantify an emissions benefit. Each of these is perfectly significant.
Yeah, some are higher, some are lower.
Sure.
Some cost more, some cost less.
Sure.
So did they actually look at it by doing the dollars per kilogram reduced?
Consider as a committee or fight back on this, and I've also been told by ODOT, who has reviewed each of these projects, that they don't anticipate problems with these projects.
Learn it as we go, right? Okay. Thank you.
So that makes me think of another question that is, if we use this specific application form and we find that maybe that it doesn't quite work the way we want it to, and it raises questions or causes us any issues, can we change it then once, we go into the next rounding?
Yeah, absolutely. That's up to this group to decide.
Right? Okay, any other questions, comments? So, we're keeping the public record open. I still need to open a public hearing now.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead, open a public hearing. Is there anyone wishing to speak to this topic?
There's no one signed at this time.
No one signed up. I'm gonna close the public hearing, and we're keeping the record open until August 3rd. For this. Okay, all right. Is that all you needed?
I did also hand out some
Okay.
in support of Lane County.
The ones that are at our
That's right.
place. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda is our future CMAQ funding, which is still up in the air. We've come a long ways, though.
We have. Good morning. Thank you, Mayor. So there were not materials in your packet for this because part of it is still in play, and I do have a draft of that part to hand out for FY19 and beyond CMAQ funding allocations. The advisory committee held 5 meetings, and the staff to that advisory committee held several meetings also. It was a very difficult conversation. There were several times where both the facilitator and the chair of the OTC, who was the chair of the committee, almost had us end, thinking we weren't going to get to a solution, but we did get to a solution. And we got to a recommended formula for allocating the funds to the existing eligible CMAQ areas. The good news is that consensus is still holding. It held through initial consideration and testimony at the OTC last month. It was appropriately deemed by one of the OTC members to be a fragile consensus. And we hope in a few short days at the July OTC meeting they will take final action to approve allocation of the CMAQ funds for FY19 and beyond, or actually that approval would be for 19, 20, and 21. The CMAQ funds that you just were looking at were funds, and it was a deal that we made some time ago. As you know, having been eligible since 13, that deal provided us $2.4 million a year. That was a good deal. We got a very good amount of money to help make up for the fact, not nearly make up, but to help make up for the fact that we had been missing out for several years. The new formula for FY19, if it stands, would provide us a little bit over $1.6 million per year. That number is a reasonable number given the various options that were in front of us. And while it's not as high as the $2.4 million we got for the first 3 years, we didn't expect to continue to receive $2.4 million. Like I said, that was a little bit, if you would, of an overpayment, a little bit of a makeup. So the formula, again, had initial discussion. The proposed recommendation had initial discussion at OTC last month, and generally seem to have support from all the OTC members. As a matter of fact, I think if they had been prepared to, they would have gabbled down and been done with it last month, because they didn't want it to break down. They didn't want to give any more time to potential problems. However, the one last thing that they wanted to consider was that the OTC has said all along that they wanted to be strategic about how these funds were used in the state. And so I'm going to pass around a document that talks to what they're still considering. And this is something that the Program Advisory Committee did not make a recommendation on to the use of the CMAQ funds. So I don't expect you to read this, but I will step through real quick what is being proposed by ODOT staff in this memo. And I want to bring up a couple of points that we think this body should have somebody testify to the OTC at the July meeting on. The strategic direction question came up because the OTC really had not paid attention to CMAQ funds for decades. This is money that had been allocated to the recipients, and it just flowed through the OTC, and really, frankly, the OTC had not paid attention to it. Now they want to pay attention to it, and they want to not only have it be used for obviously the federal purposes, but they'd like to try and leverage this money to further state goals also. They consider several options for putting these sideboards on, specifying specific projects that had to be done with the money when they handed it over. They thought about some other ways that would have required quite a bit of reporting by the MPOs or the CMAQ recipients back to the OTC. Fortunately, both the Program Advisory Committee and the OTC didn't want to put that level of detail, that level of work, that level of reporting burden on either side of, either the OTC, ODOT, or the recipients. And also the OTC didn't feel like it had quite enough expertise to get too detailed on what the sideboards were. So what you have in front of you is what they have proposed at this time, which is, they're calling it the narrowed list of eligible projects. The memo that you just looked at and that we've been talking about for the past many months talked about all sorts of things that are eligible for CMAQ money under the federal guidance. In other words, there's a whole list of activities that can be carried out with CMAQ funds, and that table is actually on page 4 of those applications that you were just looking at. It's this table right here that has all those eligible project types listed. Cost effectiveness is the title of the table, but it has the project types listed there. What the OTC or ODOT is proposing to the OTC is to narrow that list down, and to narrow the list down in a way that helps address on page 3 of what I just passed out 3 statewide goal areas, and those are environment, health, and equity. So they've sort of done a cross-tab, if you will, between all of the CMAQ federally eligible project types and these 3 state goals, and said what are a narrowed list of the federally eligible activities that help most achieve these state goals also. In so doing, they have eliminated some project types from here. And they've also made some narrowing, if you will, even within some of these categories that they say they want to narrow it down to. For instance, they are still allowing road dust mitigation as an eligible activity, but this proposal says only in rural communities. Well, we caught that right away as a concern, because if you noted in the previous history, and it has, frankly, very, very high emissions or dust reduction benefits, and it's very cost effective, round of funding. We didn't want that possibility for street sweepers and road dust mitigation to be eliminated from future consideration for our use of the funds. So I've already given that input to ODOT staff. They're going to carry that through to the OTC at the upcoming meeting. I don't believe that restriction on rural only for road dust mitigation will remain in the recommendation. There were just a couple of other minor tweaks that we don't need to discuss here, but there was one larger issue that I wanted to suggest that we submit testimony to the OTC on, the narrowing of the list as a whole. The last sentence on this page, what I don't really think is the intent of the federal guidance is for states to entirely ban certain uses that are federally eligible. And yet this essentially could do that. And so what we have suggested, I've already suggested to ODOT staff, and they've said that sounds very reasonable, you should bring this to the OTC in July, is that while the OTC may approve a narrowed list of activities, and I believe we can support that because we can supporting the federal guidance and the federal goals in the program, but the state goals that are listed here. We believe that in addition to the narrowed list, there should be a clause or a statement or a provision in what OTC approves that allows others that they're highly cost effective, or that they do address state goals that may not be enumerated here. So in other words, we want to support their strategic direction, but we also want them to allow consideration of other activities that are federally eligible that might otherwise be excluded if they didn't have. I hope that's clear. I'm going to stop there, and basically what we're at direction for either Mayor Lundberg or myself or somebody that's available for the next
Or both.
OTC meeting. Yes, or both, to testify to the OTC on this request to include, if you will, an additional clause to allow all eligible activities if applied for. My final note on that is I've also reached out to Portland, Salem, and Rogue Valley on this idea, and they've all indicated, the MPO managers have all indicated that they think it's a good idea, so hopefully we're going to have all 4 of the large recipients asking for that.
So feedback, questions? Sounds good. I'm seeing head nods. Yeah, I agree. I think that we got to this hearing, and the fact that we pretty much were at the same place, and even though the word fragile was used, honestly, I think it was pretty monumental that we came to an agreement, because there were groups that lost money or had to share, and that's always, I don't care how long we've been out of the sandbox, can be a touch we did get is that we're eligible for CMAQ funding. I think it's pretty monumental that we got where we did. I think the OTC recognizes that, and sideboards or, you know, what monies can be used for, and more flexibility is typically a good thing. That I would definitely support that, and it looks like I've got support from everybody else. Yes, thumbs up and head nods. Okay. Does that sound good, Paul?
That's fine, that's the direction we're.
Okay, so next is legislative update, which hanger at the moment?
Well, we're hoping not. So I am going to walk through some details on the transportation bill, and I'm going to give you a couple of handouts on that also. It has been pretty late breaking also, and hopefully isn't still late breaking. So late Friday evening, the -10 amendments to the transportation bill were released by the Joint Committee on Transportation. They held a hearing on Saturday at 1 p.m. that went for about, actually not a hearing, I'm sorry, a work session that started at 1 p.m. Saturday and went for about 4 hours, during which they walked through the entire draft bill. In the end, they did not make any further amendments to it, so the -10 amendments were then passed out of committee to both floors, the Senate and the House. It was not a unanimous vote of the committee, it was 12-2. However, the indications on the 2 nay votes were that they were mainly concerned that they hadn't had time to read the 300-page draft. The House floor, and they suspended the rules in order to expedite the first, second, and third readings, and they already passed yesterday on a floor that was this morning was on the Senate President's desk, scheduled for the first reading. We believe it's still okay, but at about 10, we check box to make sure that it formed behind that referral back to the Joint Committee. Brenda and I have been making phone calls and texts and checking in the past hour to see if there's anything more to it. And there's nothing that we know of that's more than just a procedural checkbox. So what did the -10 amendments do? They actually did quite a bit, and I'm going to pass around 2 more big stacks of paper and walk you through this. The first one that I'm passing around is the legislative staff executive summary of the bill. I'm very glad that they produced this Friday evening, so I didn't have to do it again. So it goes through the entire section by section bill. The second one I'm passing around just so you can see it is what the revenue sharing would mean for Lane County and every city in Lane County. I highlighted the Lane County cities in yellow so you can see what your revenues would be.
So is it,
One second. We have 3.
Oh, I'm sorry, and there is that one also. That big stack had 2 documents, I'm sorry.
So there are 3.
There are 3.
Okay.
And, yeah,
Would you
I'm
like
sorry.
me to?
I forgot that had 2 documents in that package. So in addition to the text summary, there is a revenue impact summary, which gives you the big picture on the dollars, and then this gives you the sharing down to the local jurisdictions. So what did the -10 amendments do? Well, it changed it from an $8.2 billion package down to about $5.3 billion, so it's a much smaller package. And one of the big changes there that I'll just start right off with is that it eliminated the congestion relief districts. And it eliminated most of the revenue that was associated with that concept. So for months we've been talking about, gee, they're going to establish new taxing districts concurrent with all 8 MPOs in the state. That's gone away. That is now not in there in any way, shape, or form, not even for Portland. Yes. Yeah, well, yeah. In addition, the main revenue, which was a brand new revenue source to the sales tax, and it had started way back in the discussions as 1 or 2%. It had gone down in the first set of amendments to 0.75%. Now that has gone down to 0.5%. There is still a vehicle privilege tax. It is on the 1/2 of 1%. But it's not for congestion relief projects or congestion relief districts anymore. It is to fund Connect Oregon.
did you say it's just?
No, it's on the sale of all vehicles, 1/2 of 1% on the sale of all vehicles. So, again, the congestion relief districts are gone, and in addition, most of those big congestion relief projects is gone. I-205, 217 in the Portland area, plus any potential non-Portland ones have been removed from the bill as funded projects. The only one that remains in is the Rose Quarter project does have some funding. The I-5 through the Rose Quarter area in Portland does have some funding in the project to start. So let me just talk about some of the other statewide changes. The accountability section is essentially unchanged. There are changes in here to the appointment of the ODOT director, to the OTC having some more authority and oversight over ODOT, to the other accountability section changes that we've talked about previously and I can answer questions on. It does still establish the joint committee in the legislature as a permanent standing committee. So we will now have that there in perpetuity until changed. And it also inserts that legislative committee in the process for funding large projects in the future. The fuel tax increase is reduced. It was 14 cents in the previous amendments. Now what they're approving is 10 cents. 4 cents immediately and 6 cents. The registration and title fee increases are also reduced, but there are increases to both of those as well. The Safe Routes to School set-aside is still there out of those revenues. In addition, it's not just $10 million per year, but starting in 2022, will increase to $15 million a year for Safe Routes to Schools, and they increased the eligibility for certain classes of schools, especially Title I schools. So all of those were good, low-income schools. So all of those for on Safe Routes to Schools, and I think we're all good, happy to see in the bill. The bicycle excise tax is still in there. It has gone from a percentage to a flat rate of $15 per sale on essentially what are adult bicycles. And that $15 flat tax on bicycle sales will go to fund bicycle pedestrian path projects with the restriction that it has to be commuter type, not recreational trail type projects. Also, I think good news is that the payroll tax of 0.1% for public transit remains. So there will be a brand new dedicated source of revenue for transit statewide, and that is unchanged from the earlier drafts. One of the other statewide changes is that there's a few more earmarks and a few more jurisdictional transfers in the package. I won't go through the statewide ones, but now I'm going to, well, actually one more statewide change. They've added 3 new sections at the end of the bill. They're titled Zero Emission and Electric Vehicle Rebates. That's essentially what I referred to earlier as the Electric Vehicle Rebate Incentive Program that's funded now by the sales tax or the privilege tax on vehicles. The second new section is a Charge Ahead Oregon program, electrification. And the third section is 20, I think most of you are aware, are necessary in order to gain support for the new revenues by making to electric vehicle, essentially to offset some of the impact of them in part through these new sections. So real quick, I'll go through some of the specific impacts to Lane County of these changes. New to the amended and hopefully being passed bill is funding for an environmental impact study for Highway 126 between Eugene and Florence. It's not anything more than the EIS funding, the environmental impact funding, but it is the first step. And it's good that's the first step and it gets that project moving. You have to do that EIS first, and that's going to be a rather big lift to do an EIS out there, because as you all know, it goes through Fern Ridge, and it's got a lot of environmental issues out there. So the good news is that they're going to at least fund that and get that project underway. And having that funded by the state means that the state hopefully will then follow through in future phases, eventually to construction of improvements out there. The State Highway 58 passing lanes west of Oak Ridge are still in the package, so they're funded with an earmark to add passing lanes on 58 west of Oak Ridge. I think I've spoken about why we finally determined why those were in there, and the reason is that another part of the package and another part of what's happening between Oak Ridge and ODOT and Highway 58 in the city of Oak Ridge As you know, if you go into Oak Ridge, you finally have 2 lanes of travel each direction, and a lot of people try and pass in Oak Ridge.
No.
They're going to take Highway 58 down to 1 lane of travel in each direction in the city limits, with a center turn lane and with buffered bike lanes and sidewalks along the whole extent. By taking away the passing in the city, they're going to add the passing lanes west on the highway outside the city limits. So that's what this funding is intended to do
Before you get there.
before you get there, or after you leave if you're westbound. Also new in this package, but not new to you, is that it does provide an earmark to fund the 42nd Street improvement projects in Springfield. So around the interchange with 126 or 105 or whatever of the various names that highway has.
We call it a lot of things.
I will use some of them. But the good thing is that that project was one of the 3 priority earmark requests that we had sent in a letter to the Joint Committee. If you recall, we identified Beltline, 42nd Street, and I-5 Coburg Interchange. This one has earmarked funding for it in the package, again, hopefully being approved right now. It was perhaps the easiest one to get funding for because it was the lowest cost by far of those 3. So that's good news. Other things in Lane County. It has jurisdictional transfer and funding for Highway 99 in the city of Eugene between Beltline and Washington and between Walnut and I-5. So essentially, both ends, if you will, provides for the jurisdictional transfer to the city with funding for bringing it up to urban standards. It also has jurisdictional funding for Springfield Highway, State Highway 228 to the city of Springfield. So going to transfer part of that facility to the city. Territorial highway jurisdictional transfer is still in here, as well as Jasper Lowell. Springfield doesn't have the money to replace them. When they find the money to replace the bridges, they'll also, but it's a beginning for those transfers. It transfers Delta Highway from the county to the state, and I believe that's all the jurisdictional transfers. And then the last one is a Mid-Willamette Valley Transmodal Facility for $25 million. So it has a $25 million earmark in there. We've talked about this before for a transmodal facility, basically rail to truck, primarily being the transfer. It's labeled Mid-Valley in the bill. It was originally labeled as a Lane County facility. There apparently is going to be approximately a 2-year process to determine where it's located. I checked in with Commissioner Lycan yesterday. He indicated that there are 2 legislators favoring an Albany location and 2 legislators favoring a Lane County location, and so it could take 2 years to work that out. I think we'll want to lobby for one in particular, but we don't have to do that today. This bill doesn't set that location.
We want an election in Lynn County in the meantime.
One of the other things I wanted to note is that I mentioned that the gas tax is reduced from 14 cents to 10 cents overall increase, and the immediate increase is 4 cents, and that 4 cents would go into effect in January of 18. Interestingly, the 3 2-cent increases that then happen each 2 years after that have some conditions attached to them. There won't be an increase of 2 cents unless those conditions are met. There's conditions of reporting from the OTC and ODOT to the Joint Committee, the Legislative Committee. But of primary interest to us, caught my eye, is that the OTC has to justify the 2-cent increases. It has to have projects and funding lined up for the use of those increased revenues in the gas tax. And what that says to me is that there's going to be an opportunity for us every 2 years to lobby, to advocate, to ask for funding for Beltline, funding for other projects to help OTC justify getting their money and then sending it to us. So this package doesn't, but it creates a path for us to hold this package. I think I'll stop there, see if there's questions.
Questions? Yes, Ellen.
Paul, on the zero-emission electric vehicle rebates, initially that money was coming out of the electric utility public purposes funds for energy efficiency, so you had this weird trade-off of less energy efficiencies, or more electrification.
Mhm.
Do you know what the source of that $12 million is for the whole?
Yeah, that $12 million is out of the vehicle privilege tax.
Okay, so it's no longer out of the electric utility public purse.
No. Again, specifically, they reduced the vehicle privilege tax down to 0.5%. The first $12 million goes to that fund. The remainder goes to Connect Oregon and is the source of funding for Connect Oregon, which removes Connect Oregon from lottery competition.
Oh,
Connect Oregon up to now has been lottery funded.
yeah. How much are they expecting to get out of this?
For Connect Oregon?
Yeah, because
It's not certain. As a matter of fact, I don't think the summary really talks about it very well, but when you read into the details of the bill, actually, on the summary on page 4, under Connect Oregon, I will just note that the second paragraph under the Connect Oregon summary says how the Connect Oregon program is implemented depends on how much is available each biennium. So right there it tells you they don't know. It really depends on how much that vehicle excise tax raises or vehicle privilege tax raises. They believe it's going to be right around that $75 million figure. And an initial estimate was something on the order of $71 million, but it's to be determined each biennium.
okay.
Oh, Patty.
So, what, am I the only one who thinks it's a little bit bizarre to have somebody,
Basically, they couldn't, they wanted and needed to raise registration and title fees. They couldn't do that for non-electric vehicles because administratively that's too big of a burden to figure out. So everybody pays those increased registration title fees, and essentially the electric ones get this rebate.
This would not disincentivize people from buying electric vehicles.
do not disincentivize.
Yes,
Okay. I have to think about that phrase.
Double negative, but hey, that's legislation.
Seems like you don't know what you're doing, but.
More explanation when you buy an electric vehicle by the dealer, probably.
Well, in a sense, it may work as more of an incentive than a lack of disincentive because the registration and title fees are going to be what they're going to be for any vehicle, and now you get this extra incentive if you buy electric.
Two questions, Paul. Am I reading this on the summary page, the second page, or third page? Is the Safe Routes to School in the Highway Trust Fund, so has that constitutional restriction on its use to public rights of way?
That is true.
Okay.
And that is why, well, yes, and that strengthens their intent that it only is for commute type facilities, not for recreational trails and other out of the right of way.
But for example, you couldn't do bike parking on a school property with that funding?
I think one of the things that's going to happen here, and one of the things that the Joint Committee said all along, is that they couldn't set all of the limits and details, and there will be rulemaking around this when the OTC has these funds, because it goes into a statewide fund. The OTC will make rulemaking around this new fund. So I'm not going to say no to that, but to be determined.
Then my other question was does the bicycle excise tax fully fund Connect Oregon, or is that just part of the funding?
No, the bicycle excise tax only is estimated to fund the bicycle pedestrian portion of Connect Oregon, and they're estimating around $7 million per biennium for that. So Connect Oregon now will have, to be more clear, two sources of funding: the bicycle excise tax to fund the bike ped projects at Connect Oregon after the $12 million for the electrical for the other modes.
Pat, and then Alan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of comments. Really disappointed about Beltline Road out high. Anybody who drives that knows that. And whatever time of day you drive it now, it's the same way. But it's encouraging for you to hear, Paul, that there's an opportunity every year or every 2 years to remind that this is a major project. But that being said, I was in Portland over the weekend, and they have traffic situations like that all over the place. You know, so when we hear about the Rose Quarter being funded and all the other things in Portland being funded, it's really easy for them to make a case for it because they really do have congestion in ways that we don't have it down here. We just are not accustomed to it down here. We don't know what the situation is. And that's kind of funny for me to say that, because I drive that daily. You know, and I was there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon yesterday. I was there at 10 o'clock in the morning the day before. No, the day before, not on the 4th of July, but on Monday. It's crowded the whole time. But if you drive up Powell Boulevard, you mentioned Powell Boulevard a while ago. You drive up Powell Boulevard in Portland, it's, boy, I'll tell you, it's Beltline Road at Willamette River all day long there. So, and the other thing I'm going to say is our project, West 11 is a problem, always has been a problem, but I'm loving what's happening out there with the turn lanes and all of the things that the LTD improvements are making out on West 11. Boy, thumbs up across the board on that. So, and the last thing is that when we look at the CMAQ state goals, really the transportation package seems to look at the state goals that are listed here for the transportation package too. So it's not an unintelligent set of decisions that they've made. I'm pretty pleased with the process. A little bit disappointed that there's not going to be more, but you know, that's just the way it is. Thanks for the presentation. Good job.
Oh, okay. It says new vehicles on the privilege, though. I just wanted to make sure.
Well, I'm going to have to double check that. I didn't catch that on Saturday when they were going through, but you're right. I see that wording there, and I'd have to go back and confirm it in the full bill.
New vehicles.
It says new vehicles at the very bottom of page 3 of the summary. It had previously
Under
been all
the Connect
vehicles.
Oregon, yeah, zero emission.
The very beginning of the multimodal.
Do you know what section it is?
Yeah, so it's just a question, maybe if we can get somewhere in there, because the amount of money it's raising didn't seem like it was a lot.
It was, and again, they reduced the rate.
No, true, they reduced the rate, but I'm just, so if I could get that clarified, and then maybe just in a real quick summary of the changes administratively.
Come on and just run through that accountability section. That's about a little more than a page. As it says right under the heading of accountability, it's to strengthen oversight of ODOT by the OTC, and it would change the appointer appointing the director to the OTC appointing the director. So that right there is the first step. It would also require that the OTC develop and maintain a comprehensive 20-year long-range plan of projects constrained to resources. So you're familiar that we do a regional transportation plan. The MPOs are required to do that. The state doesn't do that. The state makes a determination of projects to be funded every 2 or 3 years each STIP cycle, but they don't really, I mean, they have modal plans, they have a highway plan, they have other modal plans, but they don't have a comprehensive plan for actual projects to be funded over 20 years that they expect revenue for. This will require that new plan. I think it's going to be important as they develop that plan, and who knows what process they'll come up with to do it, that we pay attention and we have input on it, that we make sure that Beltline is in that plan, that other projects that we believe should happen within 20 years on the state system in our area. Then it also talks about how they will have expanded oversight over amendments to the STIP, whether it's new projects being added to the STIP or amendments of funding in the STIP. The OTC is already doing that. The OTC by themselves initiated that process several months ago. I think, Mayor, you saw it at a recent OTC meeting where it used to be the OTC would have several, considers them and ask questions, and is providing more oversight already over those funding decisions that used to just be consent calendar. This just puts that into statutory requirement. At the top of page 2, it says the OTC will coordinate with cities and counties to develop standards to consistently describe and report on the condition of transportation infrastructure. So that has been in here for a couple of times, and that will impact all of your jurisdictions in that they want a consistent statewide set of standards for talking about the condition of the transportation system, both for transparency and for also making the case for funding in the future. But that will be a bit of work because there isn't consistency now in how jurisdictions measure the roadway condition or report on it. The next part talks about cost-benefit analysis on highway modernization or capacity building projects that exceed $15 million. There was quite a bit of give and take on this, if you will. Originally, this was requiring cost-benefit analysis on any modernization or capacity increasing project. And then there was pushback from, frankly, ODOT that was too onerous. They couldn't do cost-benefit analysis on every modernization project. So they asked for it to be $25 million or greater, and the committee landed on $15 million or greater. So essentially on the large capacity projects, they now have to do a cost-benefit analysis before that project can proceed. The OTC will have a new committee, and in the third paragraph on page 2, it's titled the Continuous Improvement Advisory Committee, and that will be to develop key performance measures related to efficiency of operating the department. There's some guidance or some language in there about the formation of that being representation on, working to have a member or more from this area on. The measure gives the commission a direct role with the department's internal auditor. This is a little bit of a compromise. Originally, the draft of this bill had the auditor function moving out of the department to the OTC. Now it just gives the OTC direct interaction and joint oversight with the department of the internal auditor. And then it also, as I said, establishes the Legislative Joint Committee on Transportation as a permanent committee. It states here in the summary that it's responsible for general oversight of the department, reviews transportation-related policies that if ODOT wants to do something big with respect to policy, it doesn't stop at the OTC anymore. It will have to go through the OTC and through this Joint Legislative Committee, as well as large funding decisions. So it adds another layer of oversight, of transparency, of control. Is that?
Yeah, we had discussions over time about who's accountable to whom and how decisions get made. So it is I don't want to call it a tectonic shift, but it's a shift in how work gets picked, gets done at the state level, definitely. So I'm thinking along the spectrum, and there's a different level of who reports to who.
That's very true. You made a very good point there, in that we not only will have this additional step of the Joint Legislative Committee to go through for certain things, but we will have them there to advocate for certain things, as opposed to just going to ODOT at the area manager or the department or the OTC level. We can now go to our legislative delegation and say, this is the directions. And of course, the OTC membership is still in 4 days. That announcement of an appointment might happen pretty soon, and we're still keeping our fingers crossed that it's a local person.
Yes, we hope so. Very much. Okay.
Mayor, in response to your question, includes your standard passenger cars, motorcycles, buses, commercial buses, motor vehicles, electric assisted bicycles, fixed load vehicles, mopeds, campers, motorhomes, motor truck, worker transport bus, small tanks.
Small tanks, yeah. Okay, all right.
But only new.
Only new
small
tanks,
tanks,
so if
yeah.
you're going to a clearance sale, you
Get it now.
yeah. Alan?
2 questions. So what's your guess on the reasoning behind putting in the JCT? Is it just to get more, a little bit more, some oversight or power grab by the legislature to grab some authority over OTC? What does the governor think of that?
I'll give a very frank answer, in that there were, among the 14 members of the Joint Committee over all of the meetings, I heard statements all the way from ODOT's doing a great job, I'm not sure why we need to make these changes in the accountability section, to we really need to understand how the money is being used, and we need to have more direct oversight. And then some of that sort of melded into a comment that you can take as it may be, but I heard several times, we spent $1 million on a performance audit, we need to do something.
There you go.
And that was, I mean, that was said many times. So I don't transparency. The OTC meetings aren't the easiest thing to necessarily follow or give comment at, and so this is going to increase those opportunities.
Second question is on page 2 of the summary, down there under the funding part, it says registration fees for electric vehicles, $110. Owners of electric vehicles will have the option of joining the Origo program in lieu of paying a higher registration fee. What is that?
Origo is the mile tax instead in lieu of the gas tax, and I think I'm not sure who's enrolled here. I know some people are locally, but basically that's the road user fee task force that did all the pilot projects. That pilot project is now incorporated as a program titled Origo, so it's the per mile.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? No? Okay, great. Thank you, Brenda, for looking that up, and thank you, Paul, for the summary. Okay. Next on the agenda is follow-up and next steps. So, we look for ODOT. Do you have an update?
Yes, the OTC is meeting today, and one of their agenda items is to discuss the 2021-24 STIP cycle. They're beginning to formulate their thinking about the next STIP cycle. Applications wouldn't be due until next fall, but consistent with the McKinsey report recommendations, ODOT management is making more of an effort to incorporate involvement from the priority, as you have observed over the last several cycles. So the OTC will be deciding what program areas they want to prioritize, how much off-system, how much eligible for local programs. That's all in flux. It's being discussed today. We'll keep you apprised as discussions proceed with OTC.
Great. Oh, I have Springfield Main Street. I'll probably look to you, Tom,
Okay.
or to you too, Bill, in terms of what's going on.
So I think we're poised to see a revised scope of work back from the consultants and taking it from there.
Which means we're still working on everything.
Yes, we are.
And the council reiterated their support for that
Yep.
just very recently.
In
So.
May.
I would just add there was an article last weekend regarding traffic safety in Lane County, a well-publicized topic. They also mentioned the Main Street corridor and some of the safety concerns along there, but I think had a positive take on our efforts to address those concerns.
Great, good. Okay, rail? I don't think, no rail.
There's been no updates other than the ODOT budget bill that contains the ongoing funding for continuing Amtrak service has been passed.
Status quo.
It is.
Fazio and unicating a station in Oak Ridge. Of course, we've seen on the federal level that federal support of passenger rail is being cut all across, or is being proposed to be cut all across the country. So I don't know what impact that will have on that discussion, but.
So that's upcoming, that didn't happen.
Let me double check the date.
That's the one that Jim Coley was talking about
Right.
around here. That would be a pretty cool thing. I'd use it.
Yes.
Trails.
That's it, right,
Things on the
exactly.
trail, yeah.
Let me see, that
Campground
meeting
safe.
was, that meeting is August 2nd, and they'll be meeting at the high school if anyone would like to attend.
Great. Okay.
You could ride your bike if you started.
OMPOG. The OMPOG is coming up.
OMPOC is going to meet August 11th in Portland. We are just starting to pull together some of the details, so I don't have a lot to say about that meeting other than we'll undoubtedly be debriefing this transportation package, talking about what we might need to do as a follow-up. Which reminds me, I should have mentioned that in addition to things like the gas tax every 2 years. I haven't had a chance yet, but when they went through this on Saturday for 4 hours, they made a parking lot list. The joint committee made a parking lot list of things to come back to time and jeopardize, with 5 days left, this session. So there's already a list of potential changes to this. OMPOC also in August will be looking at some statewide coordination on a database, the TIP database that we all maintain individually now. We'll be looking at some improvements to our regional brochures and more to come on that.
Great. Okay. Lane Act.
No meeting in July, we're taking a break. We'll be reconvening in August at ODOT's new building in Springfield. Looking forward to that, and there'll be a special meeting in September in Florence. We don't usually travel around, but we thought we'd give it a try and have a mobile meeting in Florence in September.
I'm sure people on that side of the Coast Range are going to be happy. Okay.
That's all.
Okay. And next steps, anything?
No, I just would note, City Hall, I'm going to just let you know that that meeting is scheduled. However, we are going to assess everything, and there is a chance with recesses by many of your bodies that we won't need that meeting. I'm not canceling it right now, but we will let you know. If for some reason this transportation package got referred back an hour ago for problems, we might want to talk on the third. But if it gets passed, actually, I guess we do need to meet for the CMAQ. I'm sorry. We do have the CMAQ schedule, so that funding getting in place. We'll have to do a quorum check, though. It has sometimes been an issue in August with recesses, and it wouldn't be a fatal flaw if the CMAQ had to wait till September. So just stay tuned there.
Okay. Great. Okay. Anything else? Okay. We're adjourned. Oh, Gary, you had something.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a note that this is the 50th year anniversary of the Oregon Public Beach Access Law. And also there's been a recent increase in the unequal pay for equal.
Great. Thank you. Okay. And we are adjourned.
Thank you.